I grew up in a culture and in a family where often I was told that my dreams were too big and I should conform to a prescribed box.
I was worried at work while I was pregnant about how I would be perceived or how my work presented would be looked at.
And then inevitably the question is, so do you have kids? And it's like, no, I don't have kids. And like, oh.
And I was nervous about sharing my news about being pregnant. I guess the reason I was worried was that they were going to be extremely disappointed that we wouldn't, that I wasn't going to be able to continue and complete this work.
I have had an experience where someone who has my qualifications, but because he was a guy, was chosen for a particular part of the job rather than me.
We are on a journey and a pursuit for equality. We still do hear and see instances of where there's not pay parity, for example, where in terms of access to opportunities and advancement, it might not be as progressive as we would like.
The other part I think about is, I have 2 young kids, and I think about, what type of company do you want them to work in? And you sort of think about, are you taking the company in that direction, or are you, you're okay that your daughter wouldn't have the same opportunities that your son would have?
You need to show up and you need to stand up for the women that you work with. Don't be afraid to risk your own reputation to stand up for somebody that you believe in.
It takes effort, it's hard work, and it's worth it because the outcome, I think, will be greater than the effort that's put into it.
Women are just as competent, if not more competent, than men at the same positions or whatever it is that they choose to do.
The mark, in my perspective, would be complete equality. Are we getting equal representation, and are we getting equal and fair evaluation across men and women?
The work should speak for itself. There shouldn't be those barriers to entry. I think all of those things are changeable and should be changed.
Buongiorno a tutti. My name is Corrado Paina. I'm the Executive Director of the Italian Chamber of Commerce of Ontario, Canada. Thank you for coming to the 4th session organized by ECO Canada in a joint effort with RBC. RBC has been our mentor in this walk through some really important issues that today, are discussed everywhere in Canada and all over the world. We started with an incredible presentation, an overview of the economy in Canada. We went on, with a discussion on the house market. We had a fantastic meeting with Minister Mendicino, Minister of Immigration. And today we are here with Don Desjardins and discussing, a very important issue. A very challenging and engaging presentation by Don Desjardins and at the same time disturbing. Women and mothers in particular are really affected by COVID more than the rest of people. And, it might sound something new, but it's actually happening. And we will get into now the details of this presentation. Today, the title of the presentation is COVID-19 Further Clouded the Outlook for Canadian Women at Risk of Disruption. And we celebrate also today Women's History Month. And we are here with outstanding leaders and business women for an open discussion on how COVID-19 further clouded the outlook. I'm repeating the title, for Canadian women at risk of disruption. Let me thank RBC for making this event possible and welcome to all our guests. First, Don Desjardins, Vice President and Deputy Chief Economist of RBC. She will be the presenter. Rina Pilliteri, RBC Regional Vice President for Vaughan. Bambina Marcello, Independent Director. Mary Delamonte, President Retail and Food Transformations, Mary Delamonte INC. And finally, Michelle Joblin, a TV personality who agreed today in being the moderator. Michelle is a well-known face, so we're very happy to see you. Hi, Michelle. And allow me to give the floor now, before we give the floor to Don Desjardins, to Rina Pilliteri, RBC Regional Vice President Vaughan. Rina has been part of the RBC team for 33 years. She has held numerous leadership positions in retail banking, commercial financial services, and at the national office. She leads a broad and successful team comprised of community managers, branch managers, financial banking, and client advisors. Currently, she is the chair of the board of directors for the Mackenzie Health Foundation. Her community involvement and leadership is extensive and includes her receiving the 2012 Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal for Community Leadership and, of course, the Business Excellence Awards from ECO Canada in 2020. Rina, welcome. Rina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, Corrado, and wonderful to be here. Buongiorno a tutti. Happy Friday. A sincere pleasure on behalf of RBC to continue to partner with the Italian Chamber of Commerce of Ontario, Canada, and a wonderful series that we've been able to put together to provide value and to have an open discussion about the things that matter and, of course, the things that we can change together. I have the pleasure this morning to introduce Don Desjardins, my colleague, who, as you have said, Corrado, is our Vice President and Deputy Chief Economist. Don Desjardins joined RBC Economics team in January of 2006, and she's a key contributor to the microeconomics forecast for Canada and the US, and is part of a team that is responsible for the interest rate forecast for both countries, which, of course, interest rates these days are definitely a hot topic. Don delivers economic analysis to RBC clients through a variety of publications and presentations. She's often interviewed by media from across North America to discuss developments in the economy and financial markets. And prior to joining RBC, Don worked as a reporter from Bloomberg Financial News in Toronto, covering the Canadian bond and currency markets, and was the Canadian bond market strategist for a major US bank for 10 years. And she's a graduate of the University of Toronto. And I just want to say a personal thank you to Don, because every time I reach out to her, she's always willing to participate and to help. So Don, over to you. And thank you once again for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Rina. It's always a pleasure to speak to you and to your clients and to your colleagues. This morning, I'd like to talk about our research, what we have been seeing. As Corrado said, our title of our presentation is Further Clouding the Outlook for Women Already at Risk of Disruption. And that risk was coming from digitization of jobs in the economy. And so we looked at that previously, but COVID-19 hit, and it did have a significant impact on women compared to men. And so we've been monitoring the situation. I have to say, a year ago, for International Women's Day, we wrote a report lauding all the great grounds that women had made in terms of their financial health, their contribution to household incomes. And then COVID-19 hit. And as I'll show you in just one moment, the impact has been very, very dire for women. And it presents a risk and a challenge for the economy as we go forward. We have to get these women back into the labor market. So if we could bring up the slides, I think these pictures are helpful in terms of discussing this topic. As I said, COVID-19 has had an amazingly big impact on our economy. A year ago, we did see our economy actually close down for 6 weeks, something that is part of the global phenomenon, but certainly nothing anyone has really ever experienced. And the impact that this has had on our labor market was equally unprecedented. And over that 6-week period, about 3 million Canadians lost their job. Now, as the economy was able to regain its footing and we started to see things reopen, we did see jobs coming back. But at the end of the day, we're still sitting today with about 600,000 Canadians who were working in February 2020, but aren't working today. And when we look at the next slide, I think what it shows us is something that is really disturbing. First of all, when I talk about 600,000 Canadians who were working last year and not working this year, 58% of those are women. But this slide is showing us not only that women are unemployed, but in fact, almost 100,000 women have completely left the labor force. That, as you can see from the title, is about 12 times the number of men who have left the labor force. And during the pandemic, we've seen these numbers move up and down, but the biggest takeaway has been that this has persisted. It has typically always been women who have left the labor force, even in periods of time where men have actually joined the labor force. We've seen a real exodus of women from the labor market. And the next thing I'd say is that we've also seen more disturbing data in terms of the number of women who now are considered long-term unemployed. And long-term unemployed is out of work for more than half a year. The number of women who have fallen into that category now topping to 250,000. And that is triple the number that we saw. In fact, more than triple the number we saw prior to the pandemic. So not only are women out of work, they're out of work longer, or they've in fact even left the labor market. Well, the next slide is part of the explanation. It's because of the industries that women work in. I mean, I don't think it's any great shock that women work in industries in greater numbers, in industries where we have not been able to fully reopen. And we think about food and accommodation services, we think about retail trade. These are where the jobs continue to be lost. They haven't come back in any significant way compared to other industries which tend to have more men working in them. And so, it's kind of a bit of a common sense story when we think about it. In fact, that, it is the industries that women are working in. But when we look at the next slide, here's some more disturbing data. When we look at it in terms of income. So the people who remain unemployed, they tend to be, as I say, in the services sector, and they tend to be people who are earning less. They're at the lower end. They're certainly, in some cases, their incomes are being totally replaced by government programs, but nonetheless, these are the people whose jobs typically do not earn. The high income earners, as you can see, we've actually seen job growth, and that's in things like professional services, finance, insurance, and real estate. That's where women are gaining grounds. But we've seen a lot of women lose their jobs, and these are women in the lower end of the wage spectrum. Now, the next chart also to look at, okay, who are you? I mean, to try and see who are these people, to try and figure out what we can do about it. And definitely it's the case that younger women who are in that age cohort, 20 to 24. So just to give you a perspective there, they make about 2.5% of our labor force. They've accounted for 17% of the job losses. So definitely, this is a cohort that we have to be monitoring to ensure that they get back into the labor force. The next chart goes at the education piece. So who are they in terms of their education levels? Well, what we have seen through the data is that women who have a university degree or a graduate degree, those people have in fact seen jobs being created. It's the people who have lower levels of education. Certainly no post-secondary, you can see that's where the greatest job loss is. But even people who do have a post-secondary education, not a university, but a certificate or diploma, those people are also ones that have been losing jobs to a greater extent. So it's certainly something we have to also be mindful of. Well, the final slide is looking at really one of the key components of what we've been monitoring, and it is that mothers who have young children are the ones where they have actually been losing jobs in greater numbers. And I think it only stands to reason. I mean, we think about women who have children that their children's schools are closed, the daycares are closed. And so women have had job losses and not being back engaged. In fact, what's interesting about this chart, I think, is that if you are a mother of a young child, you're more likely to have lost your job than a woman who doesn't have children. And across the board, fathers as well as men without children, they have outperformed compared to this segment. So again, all coming back to the idea that we wanted to shine a spotlight on who these people are, because it's important to think about how do we get them back into the labor market as we move forward. So the last slide just gives you some direction in terms of all of our reports. that we've written. We've been writing about this issue throughout the pandemic. So if you want more details, I just refer you to these links and these reports. So I'd now like to get back to Rena, and we can get on with our panel.
Thank you so much, Dawn. My name is Michelle Jobin. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And Dawn, thank you for this incredibly informative and very timely presentation. There's a lot to dig in here, and we will certainly do that. I wanted to thank Corrado Paina and EcoCanada for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this very important and necessary discussion today with you all. And I want to thank again RBC for sponsoring this great series of business webinars that EcoCanada has organized as well. Now, it's really time to get started and dig into the information that Dawn has just presented to us, but I'd like to introduce our two other esteemed panelists and guests that are here with us today. We'll start with Bambina Marcello, Independent Director. Bambina Marcello is a strategic visionary with extensive sales, management, business development, and operational experience. Her strengths include leadership, collaboration, people management, and communication. Most recently, Bambina successfully led the commercial strategy at the Toronto Region Board of Trade, where she was responsible for revenue generation, membership growth, and engagement, sponsorship, and or operational initiatives. Prior to joining the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Bambina had a successful 30-year career accelerating transformational business growth at Air Canada. So welcome, Bambina. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'd also like to take a moment to introduce our other panelists, Mary Delamonte, President, Retail and Food Transformations, Mary Delamonte, Inc. With over 40 years of achievement in the retail and grocery industry and recognized as the go-to trusted industry executive, Mary is known as a change agent and the quintessential foodie, advisor to Inspired Organization for MBA Future Leaders, Academy Mentor to Women in Food Industry Management, and Mentor Leader to the Network of Executive Women. In 2012, Mary was appointed Senior Vice President of Merchandising and Commercial Programs for Sobeys Inc., where she led the strategic plans and drove the development and execution of customer-focused, market-leading innovations and new store concept designs for Sobeys full-service banners across Canada. An award-winning and active member of the grocery community, Mary has been recognized and awarded for her many accomplishments. Welcome, Mary, and thank you so much to all of you for being with us for this discussion today. And I'd like to open things up with a question, but first I'd like to say to all of our guests here today, if you have questions for our panelists, please type them into the chat and we will do our best to get to them at the end of our panel discussion. So our first question today, I'd like to put this to Mary, and then, of course, open it to our other panelists. Throughout the world, Canada is recognized as a progressive and modern country that leads in terms of gender parity and equality. So I think before we dive into the very eye-opening finer details of Dawn's presentation, I'd like to just take a look at a baseline of where women are now and how far we have come. So Mary, if you were asked, is there gender discrimination in the corporate world or when it comes to the world of work here in Canada, what would you say?
First, I'd like to say thank you for this great opportunity and a pleasure to be on the panel with these incredibly powerful women, and to the ICCO, obviously. But my answer, the short answer is yes, there is. And why? Because we're still talking about it and we'll continue to talk about it because the gap is there. But that doesn't discount the fact that we have made incredible strides. And you talk about corporations, and you're talking about women, but more importantly, it's about, gender and diversity in total. And so based on that, I applaud the corporate industry with what I've seen as some great strides with respect to making it a part of their culture, making it a cornerstone of what they stand for, and in social and corporate responsibility, putting together organizations and committees and bona fide programs that are helping women to increase their skill and move through the pipeline so that they then have the opportunity. But that doesn't discount the facts. And the gap and the reality is what's staggering. And when we look at, you made the point of coming out of, Don made the point of ones that are graduates and out of university. If 50% of the women that graduate, as they do in out of university, enter into the workforce, 50% of the workforce is women. However, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 are in senior management or executive positions, and that's a number that it continues to widen the gap now with so many women that have come out of the workforce in that segment as well. So we're taking steps behind, which means that we're really going to have to be aggressive in moving forward. And when we talk about wage parity and are we paying them, every individual should be paid equally for equal work. But when we look at the stats, since 1997, there has been a 6 cents increase. That's only a 7%, almost a 7% increase, and the gap between women and men and what they get paid for. When we look at the higher positions, although 50% are in 1 in 3, 1 in 4 are in a senior management and management position, only 7% of CEOs of the Fortune 500 will be women. And when we look at the reality of that, we all know that when women succeed, companies succeed, Canada succeeds. And so it's imperative to not only recognize the step we're taking back, recognize the great things that organizations are doing. I'm involved in boards where currently I applaud where they say 50% of the senior management of that organization is women in senior leadership and leadership. And so that continuation is what is recognized and applauded, but it's the one step ahead of the other. And how do we make it sustainable? And that's the real key, the word sustainability, so that we don't continue to regress. And more importantly, we don't get back into the, I call it the glacial progress to where we got today, and make sure we don't regress back, and it takes that long to regain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I think that is the thing, really being worried about losing what ground we have gained at this point. I'd like to open things up to the other panelists to see if they had anything to add to this at this time.
It's Bambina. And thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here this morning as well. I would agree with Mary that we definitely have made enormous strides, and we've advanced, but there are still some challenges, whether they be systemic, that still exist. And there is a unique opportunity for us at this moment to take a look at, the COVID effects, and hopefully, they will be catalysts that will help move us forward. So, for example, if some of the challenges have been around limitations, whether it be women wanting to continue their careers and their education, or whether they decide to have children, those were in some situations impediments to growth and advancement. But as corporate Canada, if we can recognize that there are different moments in time where women will require different types of support, then I think we can start to address challenges that will then underlie the ease of advancement for women. So I think that there are definitely opportunities for us to continue to take a look at what unique skill sets or what unique challenges women face, and hopefully we can address those.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to just add to that, Bambina and Mary. The pursuit for equality is definitely still on. We've made some great progresses. However, there's still lots of opportunity to continue that momentum, as we all know. And this COVID pandemic has really brought to light, and as Donna shared with us in her presentation, the opportunity that we have to do better to do better. And when I say do better, we have seen that, you know, as Don had mentioned, mothers specifically have been that much more challenged because of children. And I too, and I'm sure many of you have also seen that women being primary caregivers, not only for children, but also for elderly parents, have also been challenged throughout this pandemic. And, you know, corporate Canada, government, businesses, we all have a key responsibility to make things easier and more flexible so that there is that equality and that flexibility to be able to still have women in the workforce, and men for that matter, from a work family life perspective and a balance, do better so that we can manage all the important things and all the important elements that we have with balancing work, family life, children, elder care. And other countries have done it. You know, we've seen other countries where, you know, there's more accessibility to education for all. There is more accessibility to daycare and elder care for all, and it's not so expensive and onerous. So there's definitely more that we need to do so that we can reach that level where we have better access to education and to really accelerate the workforce, especially for women.
I guess
These are all incredible points.
Sorry, I
Thank
guess
you.
I would just add from the economy's point of view, you know, all of the data that we look at, one thing that has really struck a chord, I think, with many people is when we looked at the labor market data and we looked at the economy overall. Being an economist, that's all we do. And certainly what we saw is if women participated at the same level as men in the workforce, it would add to our economy to the tune of $100 billion every year. So it increases the pie for everyone. And that's sort of our point with looking at the research, this idea that we've seen some people who have, you know, when the pandemic hit, women's participation in the labor market fell to a 30-year low. Now we've seen some recovery there, but still, you know, it's always been a gap. The gap I think went to about 7.5 percentage points. So even when we go back, you know, we're still not there. We got to go beyond where we were pre-pandemic, but certainly we have to get at least to where we were before the pandemic hit, I would say.
Dawn, do you think that's a surprise to a lot of people that if women participate equally, I mean, it's probably not a surprise to any of us here, but do people need to be convinced, do you think, that if women participate equally in the labor market, that we all gain from it, that everyone across the board in Canada does?
Yeah, I'm not sure that people really register that, because I think a lot of times it's, well, if you have that, then I don't have that. And so instead of thinking of it as a zero-sum game, we have to think about it enlarging our economy. And the other thing that's, you know, important to think about is that we are aging as a society, as a country. And so if we're going to even maintain our standard of living that we had prior to the pandemic, we need to have more people in the labor force. That's the engine of growth. You have capital and you have labor, and that's, you know, as plainly as it can be spoken. And so if your labor starts to falter, that is going to take your economy's ability to grow. It's going to take it down a notch. So, you know, at the very minimum, we need to get people engaged in the labor force to keep growing our standard of living. And so, you know, I think it is, but once you hear the numbers, I think it's like, yeah, that's right. You know, I think it is just bringing that to light is important.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Rena, I wanted to put a question to you. When we take a look at these women discussed in Dawn's presentation that have been particularly affected by job losses during the pandemic, a very clear picture emerges. We have lower wage earners, newcomers to Canada, racialized women, and then also, as a whole, mothers, women with school-aged and younger children. So these are the women that are being most affected by the job losses during the pandemic. In your opinion, can we specifically point to the pandemic as being the cause of these challenges to women or to these women? Or were we already headed in this direction? And in what way has the pandemic perhaps accelerated these issues?
Yeah, I think we had this issue prior to this pandemic and it magnified during this pandemic. There is no doubt. Michelle, there is a responsibility as a society. We have to do better. we have business and corporate responsibility to continuously educate and train and provide flexible work arrangements and flexible work environments so that all can accelerate, men and women combined. But given women, of course, for the most part, have been primary caregivers or take that responsibility from the home front, we could see what is possible. And I saw it firsthand relative to this pandemic, where we had lots of employees that had that challenge, and we were able to redeploy many of them and get them the technology they needed to be able to still balance that work-family life component. And that only, as we all know, accelerates efficiency, productivity, engagement. So corporations, businesses, government, we all have a responsibility jointly so that everyone can definitely benefit and not have it where we're seeing it today, where there's continued issues in that regard. It's so important that we step up, we speak up, and we take action.
Yeah, I would add something to that. Well said, Rena. What I would add is also it's a responsibility of government to step in and help with all of the retraining and redeploying and skill management as well. Corporations sometimes can't bear the brunt of the whole cost and need support from the governments. The commitment of two create a great partnership. And when we look at, we got to get the economy going, because some of these individuals, unfortunately, have to work 2 and 3 jobs to try and make up one paycheck in order to support their families. And so when they've been in the service industries or food service or those type of as it was outlined by Dawn, but we know who they are. Restaurants closing down, food service closing down, some manufacturing closing down or slowing down because of the pandemic. So now their loss is compounded threefold. So it's that much more imperative that how do we then get them into a laneway that provides them the opportunity to step up, better their skill, and now afford them the opportunity to excel for themselves individually as women and support their families in a manner they feel really good about.
And I would agree, completely with Rena and Mary, that I think these challenges existed previously.
Yes.
That women with children, this cohort that may not have had advanced level education, they were dealing with these challenges before. The pandemic brought it to light on how challenging it is, and you saw them drop off, and they had to drop off. They didn't have another option. Whereas in our regular environment, like Mary said, they were working multiple jobs or doing different things. And, thinking about the mental health too of this group, chronically stressed, chronically, working, against all odds, let's say. So I definitely think that it was there. The pandemic brought it to life because they did drop off. We see all the statistics as Dawn has shared with us. And then hopefully now we can take a look and start to think about solutions. And I think this is, where this conversation is going. It's going to be about, trying to figure out what solutions we can work towards.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I think for the women that have remained in the workforce, they've really benefited from, and by no means am I suggesting any positivity about the pandemic, but we have found ways to work in a more flexible way in terms of corporation, allowing people more flexibility, and they have benefited from that. And I hope that that is something that we can take with us into the longer term to benefit, perhaps, like you said, mothers that face these challenges. Bambina, I wanted to ask you another question in regards to an important part of the recovery from this. It has been called a she-cession. I've heard it referred to, will be ensuring that these job losses do not become longer term. And that really, the women that find themselves unemployed do not fall behind further in terms of the relevant skill sets for the job market, which we're very much in danger of doing. So I put this question to you, Bambina. The subject of upskilling is an easy suggestion to make, but it can be perhaps more complicated to implement. So what should we keep in mind when tackling the issue of retraining this part of our workforce? And where does the responsibility for this lie? We've touched on that a bit, but I think we should talk a little bit more about it.
So I definitely think it's a joint responsibility. I think that this cohort of women, this group, thinking about the situation that they're in and aspiring and being curious to find out how can they make this better. In conjunction, you've got corporate Canada, you've got government, you've got public-private programming that can take place. So I definitely think you've got to have both parties working together and being flexible towards finding that solution. I think the solution has to be one that works for everyone. When we think about, we've had conversations about universal daycare programs. We should think about that. How could that make it easier for someone? Timing. When would these programs take place? The content, when we talk about upskilling, it's a great topic, but it's so broad. How do we break that down for someone to help them understand that, enhancing your computer literacy, doesn't necessarily mean you need to be the coder, but it needs to mean that you need to be comfortable in that environment. So presenting, to women what their options are and help break that down into understandable language, and then disseminating all that information clearly and easily. And that could be perhaps through the community centers, perhaps, through employment centers. But we've got to get the solutions and the information to the people who need it and understand that they may not have access to information as readily as you and I may have. So looking at the big picture and trying to solve it from that perspective, I think would, foster this ability to look for a solution and help put women into roles where they see themselves and they can also see a future for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that, Bambina, is that, the one piece that over and above government is about sponsorship. It's about a culture. It's about a stake in the ground where organizations, this becomes their move forward position in building it into the cornerstone of what they stand for, to help. And it has to be a culture in the organization in order to start the ball rolling to enable these kind of things. So whether it's government, but corporations and companies themselves that then afford, like you said, here are the courses, here are the different times that are flexible that we want you to look at so that you can fit it into your schedule. We're not piling on top of everything else. Here are our alternatives in different opportunities that will be coming up that we want to give you a stretch to go into and that we think that you can get there with. And how does that really happen? It doesn't just come out of the air. Organizations that are focused on, and that's one of the things that I'm really pleased about, is hearing more and more that not just about the gender and diversity committees and programs that are being put together, but the mentorship and sponsorship programs that are being put into organizations as well, that supports this type of growth of women and men and all groups in order to better the organization. And when we think about women, when I talked about the pipeline and making sure that we have it consistently filled, if we continue to drop leaders that are committed as not only mentors, because mentors help you guide you and help you get better, the sponsor is the one that takes that extra piece in order to sponsor you to help you get the position over and above where you want to be. And so if we continue, if we lose any of the leaders, then we have to work twice as fast to continue to fill the pipeline so that we have a very robust culture in organizations, programs, but mentors and sponsors that are committed to help this population of women move forward, and everyone else at the same time.
I agree, Mary. Diversity and inclusion is such an important part of what we need to do, all of us, as we accelerate forward. And every employee is an investment for an organization. And the more we invest in upskilling, the more that we invest in training, the more that we invest in really making sure that our employees have the skill sets, especially today from a digital perspective, to get them prepared for now and into the future, is going to be critical to the success of society as a whole. So there is, with all business success, there comes responsibility.
Yes.
And again, I think we all need to step it up when it comes to investing in our people of every, both genders and every cultural background, because of course it brings about a better society at the end of the day, and it makes it a better world. And the younger generation now, like even my own daughter, she sees the world in a different light, and they're prepared for a different world. And so we have to make them and help them see that they didn't face some of the barriers that we faced, many of us, when we were in school or growing up. And I'm proud to see that this new generation is not going to take any of that. They are that much more open with regards to making sure that they are at that skill set, if not higher, than they were ever before.
Rena, I to share a personal moment, and Dawn, in your presentation, it's exhausting to think that I hope our daughters never have to deal with what we had to deal with coming up through the ranks. In 40 years, a lot has changed, but I still get emotional, and it came back in the video when I had to hesitate, and the angst that I felt, and how I had to schedule to go into my boss, and I was afraid to tell them that I was pregnant, because I thought it was good. In those days, it was okay. Well, you're out of the system now. Everybody else will get blow back past you, and any opportunities you won't be considered. And the first thing is, well, you've got 2 children now. Will you be able to handle it? And are you going to be able to come back to work? So you're kind of totally put off to the sidelines, and you're off the track. So
you're absolutely right. My children are 26 and 22 now. But back in the day when I had to take mat leave, it was only that 17-week period, that 18-week period that you were allowed to be off. And I remember as a young mother saying to myself, how am I going to do that? Like, the baby's going to be so small, and I have to, go back to work. And there was so much stress. And lucky for me, I had family help for sure. And it made it a little bit easier, but it was definitely tough. So I'm happy to see that things have progressed much more now. For young mothers, and that we don't have to be fearful. It's absolutely a joy when someone comes and says, I'm having a baby. How beautiful is that? Well said.
And how has everything changed? Now we have the males that are taking the paternity in order to step in and, saying, hey, I'm willing to put my career on hold because now I can take. So, that's great to see.
Yeah, I think it's a point about flexibility, right? Flexibility for everyone. And just a couple of things, I guess I'd say, in terms of the implementation. I was on in a different meeting, and that we're saying, mentorship is when someone's with you, but the sponsorship is when they mention your name and you're not in the room. Yes. They're there to bring you up in conversations that you otherwise wouldn't be involved with or privy to. And I guess in terms of the implementation, the one thing that I think has really been quite amazing is Future Launch that RBC has put in place. And that is a program where it takes young people and puts them into a rotation at the bank for a year. Now, it doesn't guarantee you employment when you're finished your rotation. I think it has a very high percentage of people who do get placed. However, it's building that skill set, giving them the opportunity to, interact with the digital world, to interact with clients, to build experience when you may not have the opportunity to build all these different blocks of experience in just a normal situation. So I think in terms of implementation, this is the type of program that companies can embrace and say, okay, I'm going to invest in these people. They may end up staying with my company, but they may not, but I've given them that experience that they can take with them and launch their career.
Yeah, Don,
Don,
just build,
oh, go ahead, Bambita.
I would agree
just
too,
build
Don.
on that.
Oh.
Many organizations have implemented diversity scorecard, and that is so important that they actually look to see, how many men do they have, how many women, and they're intentional and deliberate in their recruitment strategy to make sure that they do have a variety of backgrounds and cultures and gender, and that brings strength to any organization. So I applaud those organizations that continue to do that, and we need more of those for sure.
Rena, just think about when Trudeau announced the first ever gender diversity balanced cabinet. Okay. It was a step forward. Unfortunately, we had to do that to announce to the world, but every step is a positive one when it's headed in the right direction.
And I would add as well too that I think at the corporate level it's fantastic, but as leaders, to include our teams and women who are on our teams in conversation, give them the opportunity to hear things they might not otherwise have done before. It gives them an opportunity to be around the decision-making process, hear the language. So at a granular level, during our day-to-day, we're busy and we're moving forward, but if we can be inclusive at that level as well too, and they might not be making decisions but just to be through osmosis, hear, see, interact, and where we can include young women as much as possible, I think really helps them as well too. And then they're dialed in and they're watching and they're learning as well. So there's the top level approach, but I think that we can do things on a daily basis as well and sort of walk the walk.
Mm-hmm. It's
Thank
really
you.
exposure from both ends.
Okay. Yes. I had one question for Dawn, and then I wanted to open up some questions, hopefully to our guests. And ladies, you've all been incredibly insightful, and I thank you for that. But we've touched on the subject of the younger generation a few times here in the last few minutes. And Dawn, your report highlights the fact that Gen Z women make up 2.5% of the overall workforce, but account for 17% of job losses during the pandemic. So I think on a positive note, we might think this younger cohort has more time to regain lost ground, but really we might want to look at it in a different way. So what are the implications of long-term job losses for this particular group?
It is really the inability to get those skills, those foundational skills, establish those right off the bat. When we look at the data over time, and we've looked at generations that graduate into a recession, and what we found was that there is an actual gap, an earnings gap for the first decade of their employment. It's really hard to get back to where you would have been, that trajectory of prior cohorts who didn't actually graduate in a recession. So in this case, because we've identified that it is these young women that are being left behind at a disproportionate by a disproportionate amount, it is really engaging these women in networks, finding them mentorship programs, all of these things, I think, that get people connected to the workforce. Because the other thing, with long-term unemployment, what happens is typically if you had a job, your skills start to deteriorate, but also you lose your network. So the job that you may have heard about when you were in a position, you're not hearing about that. So for young people, it's critical that we be able to get them involved in networks, somehow have them know what's coming up in terms of job prospects. So again, just to, that future launch is that type of thing, that if more companies put in these programs that really just said, okay, here's the criteria, is you're starting your career. Here's a bunch of skills that you're going to be able to amass as you go through this, whatever term it is. I think those are really important steps.
Absolutely. Okay, ladies, I'd like to open things up to our guests, and we've had some incredible questions coming in. So the first one is, what can men do to implement real equality? How can they help? How can they really understand, accept, and advocate for women's equality at work?
step up, take the responsibility, show the
Yes.
leadership, display the leadership qualities and the actions that they portray in what they say, in taking the initiative, in leading the actions and committees and programs within the realm life, you affect their families. And that fits into how you affect the results, growth, environment, and culture of your organization that is paying you to do the job, or whether it's government. So I will tell you that I am very involved in many women networks and contributing back to community. And the amount of men that I see entering into being mentor leaders, leading groups, bringing their workforces to the events. Over 10 years, I've seen an incredible amount that has changed. Is it enough? But we got to be positive in saying it's going in the right direction. We need exponential growth without a shadow of a doubt. But I believe in recognizing some of the positives, and some of the leaders that I've seen, my hat's off to them, because they have an incredible effect at volume of people that they lead.
I would also add, and Dawn touched on this, is the concept of network. I would encourage all men to look at their network, and does it include women as well, and if not, where are some of the gaps in that? And I think that as men include women more in their networks, and we grow and we work together on different things, I think there's exponential growth and the ability to look at different opportunities, and that's how you may be exposed to new opportunities as well too. So the networking power is really, really critical, and we definitely have wonderful networks of women together, but I think our own networks should also include men too. And if we are reaching out to men to add them to our network, that we should be welcomed into that opportunity. So I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, we need men to continuously be women ambassadors. I've had the pleasure and let's call it the luck to have amazing men leaders throughout my career. And if I describe some of them, they were caring, they were understanding, they were encouraging. I remember vividly one male leader that said to me, "Why not you, Rena? Tell me, why not you?" And that stuck with me. And I use that all the time to everyone. Why not you? And sometimes we have that self-doubt with regards to what we can do as individuals. And so that's the kind of people that we need, men and women combined. But again, we really have to make sure that we all together are sponsoring one another, men and women alike. Because again, men have wives and daughters and mothers and sisters, and they want to see them excel. So why wouldn't we want everyone to benefit from all that society has to offer?
I think the other thing to add through this whole circle is we also have a responsibility as women to step up, to educate, to speak out when we feel that things aren't right, in a professional manner, in bringing the issues to light. And also standing up for what we believe in. I've always said it's head connected to the heart, but stand up for what you believe in. Do it respectfully, and do it in a manner that your voice gets heard in the right way. So it's very important. And together, there's strength in numbers. And the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. I mean, we've heard it so many times. It's about, is it really happening? Are you really making it happen? So it's not about here's what's the negative, it's what's the solution. Anybody can pick out what's wrong, but how are we going to fix it? And so it's through great voices as well. So although I will tell you, how many of us have, we've spoken up on something, and it's about parity. And a woman may bring something to light, and a man may bring something to light. he is decisive and insightful. Same conversation from a woman may be assertive and too strong and over passionate. So yeah, it's that's the reality as well. So it's about building our inner fortitude in moving forward and speaking up and how to handle it.
Thank you to you all. I do have another question for all of the panelists. And again, we'll do our best to get any specific questions you have for panelists to them if we run out of time. But what steps are you all specifically taking to guide and mentor young women? And this question comes from Angela, and she says, I find that a lot of employers don't really prioritize this. And I wonder what your steps are specifically.
I'm happy to jump in there, Michelle. Thrive, and it's also called 10,000 Coffees. And it's a network mentorship program. And it allows people to connect with people regardless of their level or their background or their experience. And it opens up so many doors to be able to share with one another, the things that, experience has brought forward, and or the opportunities that are in front of other people that people want to get insights on. So I would encourage organizations, both formally and informally, because even though we have this formal program at RBC called I Thrive, informally I have lots of networks and mentorship opportunities that I'm engaged in through friends and family and through their own children and those of children of children. And so that's really important that we all step up. We all have to share that opportunity for sure.
And I would add, from a formal perspective, regular performance reviews and regular touch points, with the people on my team have always, I think, been very effective to look at, where are they excelling and where are their opportunities? We always like to do the things that we can do well. And sometimes we shy away from things that, are challenging to us. But, you have to understand that being well-rounded is very important to your advancement, so you don't have to be the economist, but you have to have some understanding, some financial literacy, and you might not have access to all of that. But in large organizations, when quarterly results come through, I've taken time to sit through and make sure people understand, everything that we're doing is helping us achieve this or that. So taking a look and encouraging, teams of women to look at, where can I excel a little bit more? Should I work on this? And I think those have been very, very helpful. They're not easy conversations to have, but they really, I think, give someone the opportunity to sit back and say, I can take charge of this particular point and put my attention towards this, and that's going to help me. So I think having good conversations so people know where they stand, so there are no surprises, and encouraging teams to, apply for different roles and look beyond and start thinking about, you're in your role now. What's going to be my next role? And what do I need to do to get to that role? It's not when the job posting comes out that you should be thinking about it. It's beforehand. So you sort of navigate your career and you own that, and you have a path that you think you want to follow, and then reach into the organization who can help you get there. So those are some of the things I like to do.
When it comes to mentoring myself personally, I'll tag on to that. But my whole leadership career has always been very focused and vested into the success of my teams and my people. And that has been through coaching, leading, skill, proficiency of skill that's passed on. How does that carry on? It's about continued mentorship. Even though I'm not full-time in the corporation, but have many connections outside. I currently today, network of executive women, I'm continue to do the mentoring and active in that community. Women in Food Industry has a mentorship program that I'm actively mentoring individuals, mentoring people that I've seen and sponsored, which is very, very important. Mentored and sponsored and seen them progress in their careers that still have access from a one-to-one because it's an investment and it's a commitment. And I really believe that as leaders, we have a responsibility to give back to community, because if we don't give back to community, there will be no community. And that's the future.
And I guess for the, well, in the economics profession, you know, one thing we know when we post a job is the overwhelming applications from men. Even though when you look at undergraduate degrees, you know, women are there in terms of the education. So, you know, being purposeful in ensuring that women networks are aware of these jobs to see, you know, and then we've ended up getting some really incredible women because they see it on something that they're looking at, not just the general sites that we would make, but in fact, something that is got women's, you know, a women's network in particular, because it is that diversity of approach and the types of research that we do. It just gives us a better balance in terms of our staff. So that is something that we, you know, looking with purpose to see, to give women economists an opportunity, because in our profession, there's just not a critical mass of women who are, well, we have one chief economist of a bank that's a woman. So, you know, still pretty low percentage compared to other professions. So
yeah,
that's one way we've tried to contribute and to.
Don, you made a really important point, and that is also the responsibility of networking, connecting, keeping our eyes open for opportunities. And the converse of that, as I mentioned before, networking, you know, six degrees of separation. It usually takes you 2 or 3 steps, but everybody's connected, and, you know, cast your net and have confidence that you will be welcomed, and there will be a connection somewhere along the line that hopefully will come to fruition and help out. So I applaud you in the way that you're managing it.
Thank you. Ladies, we are very sadly out of time. This hour has flown by. So this closes our webinar today. But first of all, I want to thank Dawn, Rena, Bambina, and Mary all for sharing your considerable insight and just for being an inspiration to us all. I'd like to thank RBC for supporting this event, and to all of you who have been here with us this morning. And a huge thanks again to Eco Canada for having me on board for this event. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. I'd like to wish you all a great day, a great weekend. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope we can all see each other in person again sooner rather than later. Thank you.